As you may recall, if you watched the earlier video on the engine service facility, I got stuck on the center track because I've got this old opening in the base that used to accommodate a jack post, which I moved to a different location, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. I figured I have an opening here in the plywood bench work, so why not do something that would be interesting? My original thought was to do an engine service or inspection pit, but looking at that, they tend to be a lot longer than this, so I didn't really want to get into getting out the saber saw and making a bunch of dust and cutting a bigger hole into the bench work. So what I concluded is just to make it add a little history and just so I get additional detail, I thought, since this area was, used to be a service facility for steam engines, I thought I would do the remnants of an old cinder hoist, because that's about the right size. So I looked at some photos and some drawings online, and I put together a styrene, basically concrete pit with a bump out there to accommodate the actual conveyor. And what I plan on doing is I'll just drop that in here, then I'll fill around it, probably put a concrete, the remnants of a concrete foundation over here with maybe some of the steel stubbed out of it that was just torched off or cut off, and then just put in a couple of steel beams to run the rails over. So it took me a little while to sort out how I was going to move forward, but I think I've got the answer now. Well, I've got the answer. I've already started building things, so it shouldn't be too hard at this point to get this center track completed. And I think that'll add a little bit of, like I said, some history and some detail just to make it appear like, it's just an engine service facility that got converted over to diesel, and I'm kicking around doing a horizontal diesel tank. This is a piece of PVC. I think it might be a little bit too large in diameter, so I might go to a slightly smaller piece. I'll have to do some research on diesel fuel tank sizes and so forth. So that's what I have for now, and I'll go back to the workbench and add in the steel. I have to make sure that's at the right height so that when I run the hand laid track over it, I can come across those beams. So that's where we are so far. Here is the finished assembly, at least, of the styrene parts with a quick coat of spray paint. Not exactly the perfect concrete color, but since this is an abandoned cinder hoist, it's going to be heavily weathered, so there's not going to be much on here that's just raw concrete color, if anything. So had to make some minor adjustments in the cutout just to get it to sit the way I wanted to. So now we'll add some weathering to this and paint the steel posts, and then I'll need to get it aligned and properly set so I can put the steel beams in across that will support the rails. Here in the engine service facility, I've gotten this old abandoned cinder hoist weathered, and then I stuck a little silicone underneath it and weighted it down overnight. So we shall see how we did here. Nice and sturdy. So the next project will be to fill in around the exterior of the concrete walls. I'll probably fill that with foam and then just do some joint compound on top of it to bring it flush so that I can run the wood ties over. Got my two I-beams painted as well, just a weathered rust color. I figured I'd leave those out until I'm doing the rails, and I'll do them at the same time, and that way if I need to make a subtle adjustment in terms of alignment this way, I can do that with those two I-beams. So making progress. Figured this would be a pretty filthy looking piece of concrete, seeing as that it would spend its whole life moving cinders around. I will also probably put a piece of foam in the bottom, figuring that it's probably more than 15 years since a steam locomotive had been serviced in this facility or this terminal, so probably pretty full of not just cinders anymore, but just dirt and garbage and so forth. So I'll probably do all that first, put that in before I set the rails and the I-beams on top. We now have the hole filled up with some pink styrofoam. I've used some liquid nails for projects on, so we'll let that dry up for a while. Probably overnight, actually, because I found that using joint compound too soon after that, the humidity from the joint compound reactivates the liquid nails, and I've had some failed adhesive attempts doing that. So I'll probably let this sit at least overnight, maybe even longer, before I come in and level this off with joint compound. And it needs to be relatively smooth so that the ties coming across are pretty consistent, so we don't have a big dip in the track there. So, and then I will probably fill in the base. I'll probably put some Mod Podge in there and just load that up with ash, cinders, 2x4s, junk, and all kinds of other things first before I run the beams across. One coat of joint compound is now in. More than likely, even though I tried to bring the foam relatively close to the top of the level of the cork, more than likely that's going to shrink a little bit and will require a second course. But I'd say let that dry a couple more days. We can get the ties back in and get back to rail laying, and I'll have to figure out what I'm going to throw in the pit for junk. I filled in the opening with joint compound, a couple different, actually took 3 layers, and I fine-tuned that a little bit, trying not to make too much dust, and covered it with brown latex paint just to get rid of the harsh white appearance. I didn't want to put any ground cover down yet until I glue the ties in, and there's no ground cover anywhere else, so I'll do it all at the same time. That was just to make sure that none of the white joint compound showed through. And I put my first layer of cinders and ash in there. Probably that's all I'll do on the cinders and ash, but I will definitely throw some junk and garbage. Again, that this is probably 15 years after the steam locomotives were here, that at some point this cinder hoist was scrapped, but just never filled in. So I'm sure I'll probably put some scrap railroad wheels, some 2x4s, and just some other debris before I put in the I-beams that the rails will come across. Then we can get back to laying track. So we'll get to it. I've got one more section of ties to glue down after this group that's under the weight, once that dries. So then I can start putting, or I'll stain them and then start putting rail in. So should be able to wrap this up today and just about have the details done in there. Got a couple railroad wheels, through some 2x4s, some chunks of railroad tie, and even put a 55-gallon drum in there, so who knows what they're hiding down there, but that's where it's going to stay. So it'll be a little bit less visible once the I-beams go in and the rail goes across. That's why I wanted to do all the detail work first, so I could get in there. And unfortunately, you can't even see, you probably won't even be able to see very much of that. Once I'm standing up on a stool, so once you step down here, you're not even going to be able to see in there. But I know it's there, and that'll allow me to keep going on this engine service facility. And I've also just doing a little bit of research online, and who knows if tank sizes in 1974 were the same as they are now, but that looks like a 25,000 gallon tank, I think. Yeah, I got the right dimensions. Close. And this is a piece of 1 1/4 inch PVC. It's actually a 12-inch, or roughly a 12-foot diameter. Most tanks, I think, are 10-foot diameter. Anyway, it's close, so it should hold about 2 tank cars full of diesel fuel, and depending on how many locomotives they're fueling up, maybe it's a week's worth or 2 weeks worth of fuel for the facility. Guess we don't need to be that accurate, but I just wanted to make sure it was at least somewhat representative of the right size fuel oil tank to service the locomotives. So I'll be able to start working on that next once I get all the track in. But we're almost there. We are all finished. So the moment of truth, we'll run a locomotive over it in a minute. But I checked it with a gauge. We should be all right. A little bit of the detail in the abandoned cinder hoist. We now have 3 tracks in the engine service facility where we previously had 2, thanks most in part to a 3-way turnout. I still have 1 set of feeders to install. I've got feeders here and here, so I'll just add 1 more set of feeders because there's my rail joiner there, just to make sure that every piece of rail is soldered to either a feeder, or if it's a small section of rail, it's soldered to the next section of rail. Naturally, the screws will get replaced with end bumpers, but I have the end bumpers. It's the Walthers type, already assembled and mostly painted. Might need a little more weathering, but given the cost of the locomotives and the decoders, we're going to have screws for now because that's pretty far fall to the concrete. So, all right. That is the last of the 3 scratch-built track components that I need for civil for my NMRA achievement program. So we'll see how that goes. But now back to scenery, and on that topic, I did start working a little bit more around the scratch-built crossing, just doing some base scenery, and I added in some more ties where both railroads took out their second main. So that's probably what we'll work on next. But I think I'll post this, as I've been a little over a month since I posted something, so we'll do that. And I also am continuing to work on the F7s, so I'll have an update on those hopefully before too long. Bye for now.